Vision Edge gives you less eye strain and reduced damage caused by blue light. We like to call Vision Edge sunscreen for the eye. It all starts with your highest level of visual performance, only achievable through scientifically proven Vision Edge.
Hi, this is Dr. Kerry Gell, the host of the documentary Open Your Eyes. Today we have a very, very special guest, Dr. Julie Poteet. Dr. Poteet received her BA at the University of Georgia. She received her Doctor of Optometry at the New England College of Optometry. She's a VA resident. She has a Master of Science in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine. She has a very special interest in pediatric vision. She works great with the little ones. She's now our president of the OWNS, the Ocular Wellness and Nutrition Society. She practices in Acworth, Georgia. I want to welcome you to the podcast. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Poteet.
Thanks, Dr. Gell.
So Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut. And if we could heal the gut, we could prevent disease. Can you explain how you got interested in the human microbiome?
Sure. My interest started from a personal story 17 years ago. And it's kind of evolved ever since. When I became interested and fascinated in the gut microbiome and how it can affect health and behavior, research was minimal at that time. In the year 2000, there were 200 articles on PubMed on probiotics. So today, there's thousands that are published each year. So it's an evolving science. But the personal story, or the reason why I became so involved in the microbiome and actually went back to school to get my master's in human nutrition, was because of actually my child. My son, when he was 28 months old, was diagnosed with autism. He had prior to that chronic gut inflammation, immune system dysfunctions. He had the best doctors in Massachusetts. He had Harvard GI doctors. And his Harvard GI doctor at that time, around 2002, 2003, told me, there's something to this gut-brain behavior. The research isn't here. I can't explain it, but there's something to this. When we have inflammation in the gut, it can affect brain and behavior. Again, that was his theory. There was a lot of research supporting that. But, I put my mom hat on. My mom hat stayed on, but then my science hat came on, and I began to research. And from the chronic GI inflammation that my son suffered from and was in treatment for, and then the behavioral modifications and changes that he started to display, the regression of development, I started to learn more about dysbiosis, which is lack of beneficial bacteria in the gut, or an overpopulation of pathogenic bacteria. And my son suffered from all of it. And what I learned from him is that helping to control his gut inflammation actually affected his immune function, his overall behavior. And so hence my, almost 2 decades worth of passion and research into the microbiome has begun. What we know about how the microbiome affects us, we're just at the tip of the iceberg. It's a rapidly evolving science. But the more we know and learn about it, the more we realize how impactful our beneficial bacteria and bacteria overall have on immune system functioning, inflammation in the body. And now we're learning brain and behavior. So
now that was probably before Dr. McBride wrote the GAPS book and before the work of Alessio Fasano. So
right. Well, Alessio Fasano changed everything. He opened the door for us, because at the time when my son was having so many issues, one of his autism doctors that worked with him had introduced the term to me, leaky gut syndrome. So I researched leaky gut syndrome, and then the MD that introduced it to me said, you know, it's considered fringe. It was considered by some quackery fringe, but thanks to Alessio Fasano, who's a celiac researcher at Harvard, he actually showed us that leaky gut is a thing. He identified a protein called zonulin, and it's the only known physiological moderator of the gut epithelial cells. So the lining of the gut, which is the largest interface between the external world and the internal world, has cells that line it that have tight junctions. These tight junctions serve a purpose. They block the entrance into systemic circulation of things that shouldn't be there, antigens, bacterial endotoxins, things that can wreak havoc and cause sustained inflammation. So these tight junctions are real. When they become separated for a prolonged amount of time, inflammation and systemic inflammation in the body can occur. One of the things that causes separation of those tight junctions is products from gram-negative bacterial, lipopolysaccharides from gram-negative bacteria. So you've got gram-negative bacteria that causes separation of these tight junctions that leads to systemic inflammation. The other thing he discovered that causes those tight junctions to separate is a molecule in gluten, part of the protein in wheat, that causes these tight junctions to separate by the release of this protein zonulin. So Alessio Fasano paved the way and substantiated all that was proposed on the leaky gut. What he showed that in everyone, whenever we ingest gluten, the protein in wheat, those tight junctions separate. In most of us, they go right back together, but those with autoimmunity genes, those tight junctions separate and stay separated for a while. So his work actually transformed so much of our thinking in gut physiology.
So explain what zonulin is.
Zonulin is a protein. It's the only known physiological moderator discovered thus far of gut epithelial integrity. So when zonulin is released, and things that cause the release of zonulin, gluten and some bacteria, when that's released, it causes those tight junctions to separate, and it causes a leaky gut. So.
Now, non-celiac gluten sensitivity, you spoke a little bit about that, how when anybody eats gluten or something with lectins in it, they will get some opening of the gut. Now, is that the small intestine or the large intestine? And how much does get released, and how long does it take for the gut to close once it is released in somebody that's not celiac?
It's the small intestine, and zonulin again is released. How long does it stay open? I don't know the answer to that, but in those with autoimmunity genes, it stays open long enough for substances to enter into the bloodstream that can create sustained chronic inflammation.
So if we have, say, a weak link in one part of our body, if it's the thyroid, or even, for us, for the eye, uveitis, which is an inflammation in the eye, talk about how that we get the release, and talk about what the body does and how it releases the antibodies and how it could be damaging.
I'm just going to give you a quote, actually. It's from a 2019 Congress of Clinical Rheumatology, where the keynote speaker is an ophthalmologist, James T. Rosenbaum. He gave a keynote address on the microbiome in rheumatic disease. And he, and I'm quoting him, "I submit to you that in any disease that has an immune component, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, atherosclerosis, obesity, diabetes, and any disease that you're seeing in your clinics with an immune component." And Carrie, let's face it, every disease we see in eye care has an immune component. But he said that any disease that you're seeing in your clinics with an immune component, the microbiome is having some effect. Whether it's a small effect or a large effect, it's hard to say. But in these experimental rodents, the effect is huge. And one day we'll have therapy that is directed towards repairing or changing or altering that microbiome. So basically what he's saying is essentially the microbiome is largely driving the health of the immune system. And diseases that have an immune component, again, any disease we see in eye care, as you know, has an immune component. And the effects are largely influenced by the health of the microbiome.
And we're finding more and more about that now with macular degeneration. We're finding that it has an immune component. But let's go back for a second about your son. How's he doing now?
Oh, he's doing amazingly. He is actually a freshman at Georgia Tech. He's Dean's List, holds a leadership position in his fraternity. He's no longer autistic. You know, it took years of therapies and getting his gut right, his immune system right, but he lost his diagnoses. He's a typical kid who's extremely intelligent, Eagle Scout, who runs my eye clinic in Guatemala for me every summer. Just brilliant. He just actually was elected to be one of the orientation leaders for Georgia Tech. So he's doing amazingly. But central to healing was healing his gut. And he would not have recovered had we not healed his gut. And I keep on going back to his pediatric gastroenterologist at Harvard, who in 2002, 2003 told me, you know, there's something to this gut-brain connection. I can't explain it. The research isn't here yet, but there's something to it. And fast forward it to today, that we know that the gut microbiome influences brain function. So this is huge. It's unfolding, and I'm kind of excited to see where it's going to go.
Well, I want to ask you about what you did for your son, but I want to hold on and just give a little bit of background. So talk about exactly what the microbiome is and about diversity, how important diversity is to the microbiome.
Okay. So any surface we touch, essentially any surface we touch, has a patina of microorganisms, bacteria, that live on it. We have evolved to have microorganisms that live in and on us. There's 100 trillion bacterial cells in our body. That's roughly a ratio of microbial to human cells, roughly of 2 to 1. It used to be believed that it was 10 to 1. Now we know it's 2 to 1. So we have this huge amount of symbiotic bacteria that live and microorganisms that live on us and around us. The human gastrointestinal tract has 95% of the microorganisms that live on us. It rivals the liver in the number of biochemical reactions in which it participates. I'm going to give you a quote. This was by Leo Gallen in an article published, Gut Microbiome and Brain. It was published in the Journal of Medicinal Foods, 2014. The 100 trillion bacteria in the body of an adult human contain about 4 million distinct bacterial genes, with more than 95% of them located in the large intestine. Since most of these genes encode for enzymes and structural proteins that influence the functioning of mammalian cells, the gut microbiome can be viewed as an anaerobic bioreactor programmed to synthesize molecules which direct the immune system, modify the mammalian epigenome, and regulate host metabolism. So essentially, the gut microbiome orchestrates human metabolism, immunity, and gene expression. So we've evolved to live symbiotically with these microbiota that exist all around us.
So we're running around, with Perel and trying to kill all the microbiome on our skin, especially now with this coronavirus. But
right.
But there is bacteria that's living in us, and without that bacteria, we wouldn't be here, would we?
No, we don't, and they serve a purpose. In fact, the Human Genome Project was a project to map the human genome that took place over a long time, but in April 2003, it was completed. Francis Collins, who's now head of the NIH, headed up the project. So in 2003, we thought, okay, we've mapped the human genome. We're going to have the answers to all diseases and disease functions. And what we've learned now is the epigenetic expression of genes, meaning what in our environment influences the way our DNA is expressed, is a huge contributor of health and wellness. Our microbiome influences us in an epigenetic level. So in around 2008, the Human Microbiome Project was started, again, headed up by Francis Collins with the NIH. And what it showed us is that our bacterial DNA in humans outnumbers us. I mean, it represents 99% of our DNA. Our human DNA, 1%. Our bacterial DNA, 99% of our total genetic expression. So, you know, that saying that you are what you eat, you really are not only what you eat, but what your bacteria eat. So it's we're learning more and more, and it's kind of exciting. It's unfolding so quickly.
So in the microbiome, is it just bacteria, or is it virus, protozoa, or are there other organisms?
It's everything. It's all that you just mentioned. So.
And talk about diversity, you know, so some people have a lot of different microbiome, different bacteria and viruses in their microbiome. Some people have just a small amount. Which way is it better?
Well, what we know is diversity of diet helps dictate the diversity of our microbiome. If you look at children in Africa and their diets, a lot of complex carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables, they have a wide diversity of their microbiome. Our children here in the developed countries, industrialized nations that eat more poorly, a lot of simple carbohydrates, a lot of fast foods, we have a less diversity to our microbiome. What we know now is the less diverse microbiome is associated with disease states and increased sustained inflammation in the body. So it's that diversity that we want in our guts and that we're so lacking now in industrialized nations.
What kind of foods does the microbiome want to eat? What kind of food should people eat to support the microbiome, to help keep us healthy?
Right. The more produce, plant-based foods, the better. Plant-based foods help. So we want to increase consumption of plant-based foods, fermented foods, kefir, yogurt, raw sauerkraut, kimchi, fermented vegetables, and kombucha. Try to eat unprocessed foods that are low in sugar. Avoid unhealthy fats, sugars, artificial sweeteners, additives, and preservatives. Microbiome superfoods that contain a sort of prebiotic fiber. And this prebiotic fiber is fiber that's undigestible, so that by the time it hits the colon, the bacteria in the colon thrive on it. So it basically is selective towards the good bacteria. So asparagus, carrots, garlic, Jerusalem artichokes, leeks, onions, radishes, and tomatoes. But again, the more diverse the diet, the more diversity in our gut bacteria. And that's what is associated with health and wellness.
So you talked about prebiotics and probiotics. What's the difference between them?
Prebiotics are non-digestible carbohydrates that actually feed and promote the health and the proliferation of good bacteria. Probiotics are different strains and species of bacteria that we introduce into our diet that promote beneficial organisms, microorganisms to thrive. You know, there's if you go into a supermarket, any store, you get bombarded with probiotics and this, probiotics and that, and there's you can spend a lot of money on probiotics, but unless you know the specific strain, because the research is strain specific, unless you've researched it, you could really be wasting your money and actually even causing an increase in inflammation. So there's two probiotics that I recommend a lot. One of them is Lactobacillus GG. It is a form of obviously lactobacillus that is very common. You get it over the counter. And what it's been shown to do is help strengthen those tight junctions of the gut epithelial cells. So the Lactobacillus GG helps with gut integrity. It's easily acquired, readily, you know, it's very common. I'm not going to mention the specific brand name, but it's the most researched probiotic. Studies have shown that it increases not only lactobacillus, but bifidobacteria in the stool as well. Another strain is actually a yeast that it's called Saccharomyces boulardii, and it as well decreases the proliferation of C. difficile, and it also increases or helps with those tight junctions of the gut epithelial cells. So Those are two readily available over-the-counter probiotics you can buy with a lot of research behind them.
How about the fermented foods that we get, whether it's kimchi or fermented pickles, not regular pickles, but fermented pickles, the sauerkraut, that fermented cabbage. What kind of probiotics are in there compared to buying probiotics over the counter?
I think eating a diet rich in fermented foods is a lot better than just trying to buy the probiotics. There's a lot more, diversity. If you look at cultures with a lot of longevity, a lot of them have existed on, the probiotic foods. So yes, I think, go ahead.
So we know that 70-80% of our immune system is because of our gut. It helps protect our immune system. When we're starting to get dysbiosis and the bacteria or the organisms are getting out of balance, what are some of the symptoms that people may have?
You can have gut dysbiosis and have no GI symptoms at all, or you can have gas, bloating, fatigue, malaise, just an overall general just not feeling well, diarrhea. But it can affect brain function, brain fog, joint pain. It affects, it can upregulate inflammation in the body. So essentially it can affect anything.
Macular degeneration is a leading cause of vision loss, with 15% of Americans being at risk or already affected. Scientific evidence proves that by using mesozeaxanthin, lutein, and zeaxanthin together replenishes the macular pigment and promotes healthier vision. This formula comes in only one product, MacuHealth.
Thank you for tuning in to the Open Your Eyes podcast. If you like the video you're watching, please hit the like button. Also, hit subscribe for weekly new episodes of the podcast, along with pod winks and bonus content. All right, let's get back to the show.
So we talked before about gluten, how gluten can cause zonulin and to open up the gut, and we could leak contents into the body and get an immune response. Talk about, other than gluten, are there other lectins in other types of grain? First, what grains have gluten? And other grains that don't have gluten, are there other lectins that can cause the same type of reaction that we may need to be careful about?
Okay. Gluten is the protein in wheat, barley, rye. And gluten has been studied for a long time because of an autoimmune disease called celiac disease. And if you have celiac disease, you have a specific genetic problem with digesting the protein in wheat. Again, because of Alicia Pisano, we've learned that gluten sensitivity is a real thing, and the effect on the gut integrity. So other things, lectins are something more newly discovered that can affect the gut wall. Beans are high in lectins, certain grains are high in lectins. Gram-negative bacteria have something called lipopolysaccharide that is released that can affect the integrity of the gut wall. So this is another reason dysbiosis can affect and cause leaky gut.
Now, did they recommend, like for your son, once they found out more information, to avoid all grains, or is it just gluten? And do you recommend to avoid all grains or just gluten?
For him at the time, and again, at that time, this was considered somewhat fringe. This was before Alicia Pisano's work was published. Gluten, strict removal of any gluten, no cross-contamination, but a strict removal of any gluten-containing grains. And it has to be done 100%. If you're going to do it, 95% and say I'm going to cheat here on the weekends, it doesn't work. You have to remove it 100%. You can run test after test. The best way and only way, really truly, to know if gluten is affecting you is totally remove it 100% for 6 weeks, and then you can reintroduce it and wait 72 hours. But for us, for him, the change was marked, and it affected him, his behavior, his stools. It was yeah, it was transformative for him to remove gluten. So,
If you could explain what celiac is.
sure. Celiac is an autoimmune disease where the inciting agent is the protein in wheat. And celiacs, when you remove the inciting agent, remove the protein in wheat, that's the treatment. That's the treatment. But untreated, it causes gut inflammation, stunning of growth. It can cause just so many deleterious problems in the body. But the treatment for that is just a sustained removal of gluten from the diet.
And I guess when you have celiac, you really can't absorb nutrients very well.
No, when the gut's inflamed, you don't absorb nutrients well at all.
So that, I guess that puts you at risk for many chronic conditions.
Right. And the thing about autoimmune disease, when you have one autoimmune disease, your risk of having another is so great. And autoimmunity is the third leading cause of morbidity and mortality in the United States, just behind heart disease and cancer. So when you've got an intervention that can mitigate your risk and the severity of autoimmunity, it's worth looking into. And I think Alicia Fasano's work has shown us that in those with genes, an autoimmunity genes, gluten really can be a trigger and something that perpetuates it. So,
tell us about a case that you might have been familiar with in practice of removing gluten and the improvement that you've seen.
So, I have a patient who's 55 years old, comes to see me annually for eye exams, and I'm just gonna call him Jerry. So Jerry, I'm substituting his name here. Chronic high blood pressure, eczema, hypercholesteremia, but he's been under the care of a dermatologist since he was a child for just chronic eczema. And eczema falls under the umbrella term of immune system dysfunction. You've got allergy, you've got autoimmunity. Eczema follows under that umbrella. So about a year ago, I saw Jerry for his routine exam, and we talked about his eyes, his eye health, and he mentioned to me, my eczema is flaring up right now. I'm on steroids. I'm just miserable right now. And so I actually told him in passing, in some people, ingestion of gluten can perpetuate inflammation and can actually be damaging. And so I just mentioned it in passing to Jerry. And so he came back a few months ago for a routine exam, and he starts pulling up his sleeves and pulling up his pants. And he's like, I got to show you something. And I was like, I had totally forgotten that I told him about removing gluten. But he said, no, I need to show you, Dr. Poteet. Look, it's all gone. And I was like, well, I didn't see anything on his arms. And I did a VA residency. I saw the VA hospital where I worked. It was also a psych hospital as well. So we saw a lot of patients. And so I found myself having, Jerry's sitting here pulling up his arms, his shirt and his pants, having me look at something. And I find myself leaning back, looking over my shoulder to see if Jerry was possibly on some psych meds or what was going on. But he kept saying, Dr. Poteet, you have to look, it's all gone. And so finally I just said, Jerry, I don't see anything. What are you talking about? He said, my eczema is all gone. He said, you'd mentioned in passing a year ago about gluten. And I went straight home and told my wife, we need to take gluten out of our diets. He said, and for the first time in my life, I'm not on steroids. He said, I've been under the care of a dermatologist my whole life. I've suffered. And now, my eye doctor cured my eczema. So he tells everyone that his eye doctor cured his eczema. But, that's how powerful just removing gluten can be if it's affecting you. But his eczema was all gone. So it was life-changing for him. He'd lost 30 pounds. So it can be transformative.
When you talk about autoimmune disease, and there's over 100 autoimmune diseases now that have been discovered, and it's more common in females than males. What are the main causes of autoimmune disease? I know Fasano has a three-legged stool that he talks about. You could talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So autoimmune disease is a complex interaction between genes, infections, our environment, and the microbiome in the gut. So it's this complex interaction between these things. So, in eye care, we see a lot of autoimmunity. Any type of autoimmune disease can affect inflammation in the eye. And Carrie, as you know, inflammation in the eye is not a good thing. I spend my days in clinic prescribing steroids constantly for inflammation in the eye. But again, it's that interaction between genes, infections, environment, the environment, and the microbiome in the gut.
And when you see somebody with an autoimmune condition, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, a lupus, MS, things that could affect from the front of the eye all the way to the back of the eye. Let's talk about things that are, or conditions that are not that serious, such as dry eye. I mean, not that dry eye is not serious, but we're not talking about a swollen optic nerve or an optic nerve that's not working, which is very, very serious because that could lead to someone who has trouble seeing or blindness. Let's talk about dry eye. So you have a patient come in who has an autoimmune condition such as rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, or something like that. And how, in addition to the steroids, what other recommendations may you make to that patient?
One of my mentors, Sidney McDonald Baker, he is an MD that has been involved a lot. He's formerly trained as a pediatrician, was head of the Gazelle Human Institute, but has done a lot of work in nutrition and autism. He's made the comment that it's easier to change somebody's religion than their diet. And even though it's really tough to get patients to change their diet, I know from personal experience and from 20 years of research how powerful and impactful changing diet can be. So with my patients that come in with recalcitrant inflammation in the eye from autoimmunity, I go to gluten, and I mention the connection between gluten, and I talk about dietary changes, and I talk about changing the microbiome through produce, through through good fibers. So I introduce diet into it so much, and it's because it is powerful, and it really gets to the root cause. So
talk about how the microbiome could be related to obesity.
Okay, so there is an obese. I'm just pulling up my slide from that. There's an obese microbiome, and studies in germ-free rats has shown that it's transmissible. So when germ-free rats are colonized with fecal bacteria taken from obese rats, without changing their exercise or caloric intake, you see an increase in weight and total body mass, despite no changes in caloric input or output. So again, what we're learning is that there is an obese microbiome. You can do fecal transplants from an obese person and put them in a thin person, and that person will gain weight. So it's fascinating. And again, we're just at the tip of the iceberg in our understanding, but we've learned a lot from germ-free rat studies. So, yeah.
It's amazing about fecal transplants, and that they're doing fecal transplants with C. diff. It's almost 100% curable with people with C. diff. You might want to talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Well, it's still in the process of being a little better regulated, but what we do know is that fecal transplantation from a healthy gut into someone with C. diff, it can be curative, and this is often reserved as a last ditch effort. But the results are unbelievable. So we've also seen fecal transplants with autistics that have shown, a resolution of symptoms after a fecal transplant. So again, there's so much we don't know, but it's fascinating. Fecal transplants, just taking bacteria from a healthy gut or a healthy person and transplanting it into a diseased person and seeing the changes in structure and function, not just in the gut, but in the brain and behavior and the immune system, is exciting. So it's an unfolding science.
So there's the gut-brain connection. So talk about the gut and the microbiome of the gut and how it could affect mood.
So I did my master's in human nutrition and functional medicine. My master's thesis was in 2013, was on using probiotics to treat anxiety and depression. And it was, again, not much research at the time on that. Now it's exploding. And what we do know is that depression, anxiety are associated with inflammation in the body, inflammation in the brain. What controls and contributes to inflammation? It's the makeup of our gut bacteria. It either promotes inflammation or promotes T regulatory cells that keep all the inflammation in check. So the foods we eat largely affect depression, anxiety, brain inflammation. When the pediatric GI specialist with Harvard told me in 2003, there's something to this gut-brain connection. I can't explain it. The research isn't there. But in the kids that I see with inflamed guts, they have concomitant behavioral changes, developmental issues. I mean, he was passionate about it. And since then, now we do have the data to back this up. Alzheimer's disease is associated with inflammation and dysbiosis of the gut. Dementia is associated with inflammation, dysbiosis of the gut. Depression, anxiety associated with inflammation, dysbiosis of the gut. So what we eat affects our gut microbiome, and it affects our brain function. And we're learning that this is not just a small effect, but a huge effect. In our industrialized nation, what we eat has changed so much over the years. We do know that, dementia, Alzheimer's, just, it's approaching epidemic levels. And one way to mitigate that risk, again, is through our microbiome and what we eat. So it's either the promotion of healthy lifestyle while our inflammation is kept in check, or a pro-inflammatory lifestyle. So
let's talk about some of the eye diseases that can be affected by dysbiosis, such as macular degeneration, uveitis. You could talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think we talked before, inflammation, when left unchecked, causes changes in our body. Every eye disease has an inflammatory component. We know that now. So, macular degeneration, glaucoma, uveitis, which is inflammation in the eye, all affected by systemic health and wellness. So I think, just to make it so simple, if we just look at inflammation, that kind of sums up everything from just a very, simplistic level. We do have different microbiomes that exist on different parts of our body. We have an ocular microbiome. We have a collection of microbes that are specific to our ocular environment. And so a lot of studies have looked at, inflammation on the front of the eye, Sjogren's syndrome, the ocular microbiome versus the gut microbiome. And what we do know, the gut microbiome is largely responsible, and dysbiosis in the gut microbiome is known to be a stronger driver of eye disease than topical or than the ocular microbiome. So again, I really, really, truly believe it's not all about the gut, but it's almost all about the gut. So, you cannot heal the body until you address healing the gut. So.
When a patient comes in and they have a lot of rosacea, and, it just kind of is a symptom that inside that the body is not doing so well. And when at one time we thought that the conjunctiva didn't have a microbiome, and now we realize that there is a microbiome of the conjunctiva. I wonder if someday there'll be drops that will be actually bacteria that we'll actually be putting in our eye to improve the microbiome, almost like probiotic drops. Have you heard anything about that?
I think that's awesome. I haven't. Have you? I haven't. Have
Yeah,
you heard
yeah.
anything?
Dr. Harvey Fishman, who's a ophthalmologist, an MD, PhD out in California. He's Stanford trained, and he talks about that there's something that they're working on a topical microbiome, so a topical probiotic. So it's still pretty far away, but it may be something that we're going to be using at some point and using with our patients, especially when people put a lot of makeup and a lot of different chemicals on their body and on their eyes, because it could change. It'll, just like our gut is changed by foods that we're eating, or we're exposed to GMOs, and we're taking antibiotics. I remember a number of years ago, there was a study that said that if you a patient who was on 5 antibiotics over 15 years had about a 50% increased risk of diabetes, just because it was shifting the microbiome so much. So the microbiome is a new frontier, and it's really, really very exciting. It's a really exciting subject that we could help our patients through diet. We help them through diet, exercise, getting outside in the sun. It's not just diet, it's also stress reduction and sleep and other lifestyle factors that support health, as you know. So let's talk about some of the things that you did for your son and some of the things people could do to improve their microbiome. I know we touched a little bit about it before, but if you could touch on it a little bit more, and how difficult is it to do it? What kind of supplementation would you recommend? What to avoid? How could we improve in this area?
So I do want to go back to what you said about the topical probiotic drops, and the mechanism with which that would improve eye health would be because they act as an anti-inflammatory, right? When you get rid of the bacteria that are promoting inflammation and support the growth of the beneficial bacteria, that actually acts as an anti-inflammatory. So I think that's exciting to me. I think one of the greatest disruptors of our or one of the greatest causes of dysbiosis is antibiotic use. Studies have shown that overuse of antibiotics just wreaks havoc on our gastrointestinal system. Some of the species that are affected never recover. Some of them take up to 4 years to recover. You can give someone probiotics. When you cannot affect sustained change in the microbiome with a probiotic unless you keep them on it. Once you stop a certain species or strain of probiotics, your body kind of goes back to normal. So you have to stay on that certain strain. So it's a myth that you think taking a probiotic for 2 to 3 weeks is going to lead to lasting change in that particular colonization of that probiotic. So with my son, healing his gut was paramount to healing his brain. Change of diet, fermented foods, and autistic kids, they tend to be very self-limited in what they will eat. But we had to make a conscious effort, take the sugar away, increase the omega-3s. Omega-3s are huge. Omega-3s have been shown to be low. DHA has been shown to be low in a lot of kids, ADHD, autism, dyslexia even. Those kids have been found to have low levels of DHA in their brains. So we supplement with the omega-3s, which actually help upregulate the good bacteria. Take the gluten away. We, phytonutrients. We work on diet. Probiotics were huge. I used a lot of Lactobacillus GG, which helps seal the lining of the gut. And this is a process. It's a marathon and not a sprint in healing the gut. It takes a long time to heal the gut. You can change the gut microbiome in 72 hours by changing your diet. But as far as healing the gut, it takes a long time. You mentioned stress. The interesting thing about stress, what we do know now, we're under stressful situations, the body releases norepinephrine. What norepinephrine does to pathogenic bacteria is like throwing lighter fluid on a fire. Pathogenic bacteria, for some reason, love norepinephrine. They get excited and do the happy dance. So when we're under stress, we're actually changing the makeup of our gut microbiota. So stress reduction is huge as well. So we're learning everything, kind of everything affects the functioning of the gut microbiota. But by far, food, antibiotics save lives. You and I, we prescribe them every day in our clinic. They're needed. Whenever I do prescribe an oral antibiotic, I never prescribe one without concomitantly prescribing Lactobacillus GG. And I ask patients to stay on that even after they've stopped the antibiotic. So it's really important. It helps mitigate the risk of that antibiotics can confer on our gut. So.
Wow, that's great information. Is there any other supplements that you use, any kind of powders that you do to kind of help heal and seal the gut?
There are so many things you can use. And again, it's individualized. That's why I'm a huge fan of personalized nutrition. It can be individualized. One probiotic for you can do something totally different in someone else. So it's individualized. IgG 2000 is a powder or a liquid you can take. It's immunoglobulin that has been shown to heal the gut. L-glutamine is an amino acid that has been shown to heal the gut. Good bacteria, probiotics, fermented foods are probably the way to go. Fermented foods and removal of the processed foods will do more to heal your gut than most things. But again, gluten, I take away the gluten. So, excuse me, to me, that's huge. So, but not everyone you ask will say that. So,
okay, I have to ask you about kombucha.
Okay.
Every store is selling kombucha. Do you have an opinion about that?
It's expensive, right? And a lot of it's full of sugar. And I think the research is all over the place. So I think, I think the research is all over the place. Again, it's what, $3.50 for a bottle. And I'll be honest, the first time I drank some kombucha on an empty stomach, there's an alcohol and not an insignificant amount of alcohol in the fermentation in this. I actually felt a little buzz. I think the research again is all over the place, and not all products are created equally. What's your opinion on it?
I think there's too much sugar in it, and I think it's like a healthy man's soda now, and there's more and more sugar in it. Yeah, maybe there's a little bit of probiotics. I think if you make it yourself, my wife makes the kombucha, and the sugar gets burnt off from the bacteria, and then basically there's no sugar in it. So I think that's okay. But I think you're much better off eating fermented foods, fermented vegetables. And I try to eat. Me personally, I try to eat fermented, vegetables every day, whether it's sauerkraut or kimchi or something in my salad every day, because it's a great way of getting that good bacteria, and we need it. And, and if you're not getting that good bacteria, you're not protecting yourself, and you're protecting your immune system. So I think.
I think the easiest way to sum it up: eat a diverse diet, tons of fruits and vegetables in a great diversity, and then that will help you have a diversity of your microbiome. It's very simple. It's very simple. We like our McDonald's French fries and our hamburgers, and but I think our diet's killing us. It really is. And I think that quote you said in the beginning about healing the gut and Hippocrates, I think it's beautifully said. It sums up everything.
So give me, and to end the interview, give me some of the lifestyle factors that you recommend to your patients and that you practice for yourself and your family to help keep you healthy.
Okay. I think everything we feed ourselves, and what we feed ourselves is not just food, it's emotions, it's sunlight, it's being outdoors. It's huge. I'm a huge proponent of exercise. Getting time outdoors in nature is very important. Eating a healthy diet, prayer and belief in something. I believe that helping others and doing for others creates, such a huge benefit to ourselves. David Perlmutter is a neurologist who's published a lot of books on the microbiome of the brain. And he just published a new book, and it deals a lot with behavior and how we make good lifestyle choices. And what he showed is that chronic sustained inflammation actually downregulates the part of our brain that is responsible for good lifestyle choices. It upregulates that amygdala, which is kind of the infant fight or flight, impulsive part of our brain. And so it's kind of a feed forward system. You know, all day long, I ask my patients, you know, are you exercising? Are you eating well? Are you getting sunshine? You know, are you involved with your community? And then the patients will come back a year later having not made any changes. Well, based on Dr. Kormoda's work, I'm learning that it's not as much their fault as it's kind of almost a hijacking of their brain. When the brain's under chronic sustained inflammation, that prefrontal cortex that helps us make good lifestyle decisions is downregulated and quieted. And so you have this overaction, this impulsivity, this narcissism, this, you know, this lack of the ability to make good choices. So again, I think anything in our body, anything we do in our environment that downregulates inflammation, food, love, you know, prayer, exercise, being out in nature. I'm a huge proponent of meditation and what it does to the brain. But yeah, you know, we can actually sleep. I left off sleep. Sleep's one of the most important things. You know, sleep's not a passive process. When we sleep, there's an active clearing out of toxins from the lymphatic system that is not involved when we're awake. So sleep is huge. So what I do with my patients is, rather than tell them all these things at once, I'll often start with one intervention that's going to help upregulate the prefrontal cortex. So, you know, just go home and work on, for the next few months, getting a good night's sleep, 8 hours of sleep. Start with that one intervention, okay? And then we work on diet, or then we work on exercise. I mean, you know, you can just give them one thing to start with. Oftentimes, that helps them make better decisions for the future. So,
I just interviewed for the podcast Austin Perlmutter about his
he's wonderful.
brainwash. It was really very interesting. This was great information, Julie. I really appreciate it. If people want to get in touch with you and they want to learn more about you, they want to become a patient, or they want to learn about OWNS, can you give us some information about that?
Sure. The Ocular Wellness and Nutrition Society is the professional society for anybody involved in the field of eye research, ODs, MDs, PhDs. And our job is to help educate the public on nutritional protocols and lifestyles that promote ocular health and wellness. I can be reached. I'm just going to give you my personal email. It's Dr. Julie Poteet @gmail.com. I can also be reached through the OWNS website, ocularnutritionsociety.org.
And if somebody wants to become a patient of yours, how could they do that?
You can contact True Vision Eye Care in Ackworth, Georgia. So, and you can take it from there. So.
Well, Dr. Julie, I want to thank you for being my guest today. You're a wealth of information. You're a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge. And this is Dr. Kerry Gelb signing off for Open Your Eyes, the documentary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Since I bought Safe For You, my dad makes me clean his boat.
Es natural y es un buen producto.
Every time I go back to school, my mom always makes sure that I have my Safe For You products. I like to bring extra, and my roommates certainly don't mind.
It's a good thing I had Safe For You to clean up after this little guy.
When my hands get dry, I like to wash them with Safe For You.
And most importantly, the reason why I buy Safe For You is because it's safe for me and you.